The keeper of Cademuir, John Buchan, the gamekeeper of Cademuir, strode in leisurely fashion over the green side of the hill. The bright chilly morning was past, and the heat had all but begun, but he had lain long abed, deeming that life was too short at the best, and there was little need to hurry it over. He was a man of a bold carriage, with the indescribable air of one whose life is connected with sport and rough moors. A steady grey eye and a clean chin were his best features, otherwise, he was of the ordinary make of a man, looking like one born for neither good nor evil in any high degree. The sunlight danced around him, and flickered among the brackens, and though it was an everyday sight with him, he was pleased, and felt cheerful, just like any wild animal on a bright day. If he had had his dog with him, he would have sworn at it to show his pleasure. As it was, he contented himself with whistling the Linton ploughman, and setting his heels deep into the soft green moss. The day was early and his way was long, for he purposed to go up Manor Water to the shepherd's house about a matter of some foxes. It might be 10 miles, it might be more, and the keeper was in no great haste, for there was abundant time to get his dinner and a smoke with the herd, and then come back in the cool of the evening, for it was summertime, when men of his class have their holiday. 2 miles more, and he would strike the highway. He could see it even now coiling beneath the straight sides of the glen. There it was easy walking, and he would get on quickly, but now he might take his time. So he lit his pipe, and looked complacently around him. At the turn of the hill, where a strip of wood runs up the slope, he stopped, and a dark shadow came over his face. This was the place where, not 2 weeks ago, he had chased a poacher, and but for the fellow's skill in doubling, would have caught him. He cursed the whole tribe in his heart. They were the bane of his easy life. They came at night, and took him out on the bleak hillside when he should have been in his bed. They might have a trap there even now. He would go and see, for it was not 200 yards from his path, so he climbed up the little howe in the hill beside the firwood, where the long thickets of rushes, and the rabbit warrens made a happy hunting ground for the enemies of the law. A snipe or two flew up as he approached, and a legion of rabbits scurried into their holes. He had all but given up the quest, when a gleam of something among the long grass caught his attention, and in a trice he had pulled back the herbage, and disclosed a neatly set and well-constructed trap. It was a very admirable trap. He had never seen known like it, so in a sort of angry exultation, as he thought of how he would spoil this fine game, he knelt down to examine it. It was no mere running noose, but of strong steel, and firmly fixed to the trunk of an old tree. No unhappy pheasant would ever move it, were its feet once caught in its strong teeth. He felt the iron with his hand, feeling down the sides for the spring, when suddenly with a horrid snap the thing closed on him, pinning his hand below the mid-finger, and he was powerless. The pain was terrible, agonizing. His hand burned like white fire, and every nerve of his body tingled. With his left hand he attempted to loosen it, but the spring was so well concealed, that he could not find it. Perhaps, too, he may have lost his wits, for in any great suffering the brain is seldom clear. After a few minutes of feeble searching and tugging, every motion of which gave agony to his imprisoned hand, he gave it up, and in something very like panic, sought for his knife to try to cut the trap loose from the trunk. And now a fresh terror awaited him, for he found that he had no knife. He had left it in another coat, which was in his room at home. With a sigh of infinite pain, he stopped the search, and stared drearily before him. He confusedly considered his position. He was fixed with no possibility of escape, some 2 miles from the track of any chance passer-by. They would not look for him at home until the evening, and the shepherd at Manor did not know of his coming. Someone might be on the hill, but then this house was on a remote side where few ever came, unless their duty brought them. Below him in the valley was the road with some white cottages beside it. There were women in those houses, living and moving not far from him. They might see him if he were to wave something as a signal. But then, he reflected with a groan, that though he could see their dwellings, they could not see him, for he was hidden by the shoulder of the hill. Once more he made one frantic effort to escape, but it was unsuccessful. Then he leant back upon the heather, gnawing his lips to help him to endure the agony of the wound. He was a strong man, broad and sinewy, and where a weak might have swooned, he was left to endure the burden of a painful consciousness. Again he thought of escape. The man who had set the trap must come to see it, but it might not be that day, nor the next. He pictured his friends hunting up and down Manor Water, every pool and wood, passing and repassing not 200 yards from where he was lying dead, or worse than dead. His mind grew sick at the thought, and he had almost fainted in spite of his strength. Then he fell into a panic. The terror of rough hard-handed men, which never labored in their mind. His brain whirled, his eyes were stilled, and a shiver shook him like a reed. He puzzled over his past life, feeling, in a dim way, that it had not been as it should be. He had been drunk often, he had not been over-careful of the name of the Almighty. Was not this some sort of retribution? He strove to pray, but he could think of no words. He had been at church last Sunday, and he tried to think of what he had heard, but try as he would, nothing came to his mind, but the chorus of a drinking song he had often heard sung in the public house at Peebles. When the hoose is rinnin' round about, it's time enough to flit, for we've lip and eye to Providence. And see will we yet. The irony of the words did not strike him, but fervently, feverishly, he repeated them, as if for the price of his soul. The fit passed, and a wild frenzy of rage took him. He cursed like a fiend, and yelled horrible menaces upon the still air. If he had the man who set this trap, he would strangle the life out of him here on this spot. No, that was too merciful. He would force his arm into the trap, and take him to some lonely place where never a human being came from one year's end to the other. Then he would let him die, and come to gloat over his suffering. With every turn of his body he wrenched his hand, and with every wrench, he yelled more madly, till he lay back exhausted, and the green hills were left again in peace. Then he slept a sleep which was half a swoon, for maybe an hour, though to him it seemed like ages. He seemed to be dead, and in torment, and the place of his torment was this same hillside. On the brave face, 1,000 evil spirits were mocking his anguish, and not only his hand, but his whole body was imprisoned in a remorseless trap. He felt the keen steel crush through his bones, like a spade through a frosted turnip. He woke screaming with nameless dread, looking on every side for the infernal faces of his dreams, but seeing nothing but a little chaffinch hopping across the turf. Then came for him a long period of slow, despairing agony. The hot air glowed, and the fierce sun beat upon his face. 1,000 insects hummed about him, bees and butterflies and little hill moths. The wholesome smell of thyme and bent was all about him, and every now and then a little breeze broke the stillness, and sent a ripple over the grass. The genial warmth seemed stifling, his head ached, and his breath came in sudden gasps. An overpowering thirst came upon him, and his tongue was like a burnt stick in his mouth. Not 10 feet off, a little burn danced over a minute cascade. He could see the dust of spray, which wet the cool green rushes. The pleasant tinkle sang in his ears, and mocked his fever. He tried to think of snow and ice and cold water, but his brain refused to do its part, and he could get nothing but an intolerable void. Far across the valley, the great forehead of Dollar Law raised itself, austere and lofty. To his unquiet sight, it seemed as if it rolled over on scrape, and the two played pranks among the lower hills beyond. The idea came to him, how singularly unpleasant it would be for the people there, among them a shepherd to whom he owed £2. He would be crushed to powder, and there would be no more of a debt at any rate. Then a text from the scriptures came to haunt him, something, he could scarce tell exactly, about the hills and mountains leaping like rams. Here it was realized before his very eyes. Below him, in the peaceful valley, manna water seemed to be wrinkled across it, like a scrawl from the pen of a bad writer. When a bird flew past, or a hair started from its form, he screamed with terror, and all the wholesome sights of a summer day were wrought by his frenzied brain into terrible phantoms. So true is it that natural benigna and natural maligna may walk hand in hand upon the same hillside. Then came the time when the strings of the reason are all but snapped, and a man becomes maudlin. He thought of his young wife, not 6 weeks married, and grieved over her approaching sorrow. He wept unnatural tears, which, if anyone had been there to see him, would have been far more terrible than his frantic ravings. He pictured to himself in gruesome detail, the finding of his body, how his wife would sob, and his friends would shake their heads, and swear that he had been an honest fellow, and that it was a pity that he was away. The place would soon forget him. His wife would marry again, his dogs would get a new master, and that was the question, where would he be? And a new dread took him, as he thought of the fate which might await him. The unlettered man, in his times of dire necessity, has nothing to go back upon but a mind full of vivid traditions, which are the most merciless of things. It might be about 3 or 4 o'clock, but by the clock in his brain it was weeks later, that he suffered that last and awful pain, which anyone who has met it once, would walk to the end of the earth to avoid. The world shrank away from him, his wits forsook him, and he cried out, till the lonely rocks rang, and the warps mingled their startled cries with his. With a last effort, he crushed down his head with his unwounded hand upon the tree trunk, till blessed unconsciousness took him into her merciful embrace. At 9 o'clock that evening, a ragged, unshorn man, with the look of one not well at ease with the world, crept up the little plantation. He had a sack on his back for his ill-gotten plunder, and a mighty stick in case of a chance encounter. He visited his traps, hidden away in little nooks, where no man might find them, and it would have seemed as if trade were brisk, for his sack was heavy, and his air was cheerful. He looked out from behind the dike at his last snare carefully, as behoved one in danger, and then with a start he crouched, for he saw the figure of a man. There was no doubt about it, it was his bitterest enemy, the keeper of Cademuir. He made as if to crawl away, when by chance he looked again. The man lay very still. A minute later he had rushed forward with a white face, and was working as if for his life. In half an hour 2 men might have been seen in that little glen. One, with a grey, sickened face, was gazing vacantly around him, with the look of someone awakened from a long sleep. By dint of much toil, and half a bottle of brandy, he had been brought back from what was like to have been the longest sleep he had ever taken. Beside him on the grass, with wild eyes, sat the poacher, shedding hysterical tears. "Die onything ye like wi' me," he was saying, "kick me or kill me, and I'm ready. I'll gang to jail wi' ye, to Peebles or the Coulton, and no say a word. But oh, my God, I thought ye were by wit."